This time on Poll Hub, the president, the wall, and the polls. CNN's Ron Brownstein joins us to dig deep into new polls on how Americans think about Trump, immigration, and a whole lot more. And a hint, it's not just suburban moms that are the focus. You might be surprised. There's some surprises here for us to talk about. So let's get started. And hi, everybody. Welcome to the Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
Well, we certainly were very busy this week. We were doing polling, a national polling with our partners, NPR, the PBS NewsHour, and we walked right into a bunch of issues that were being talked about in Washington, D.C.
It's all about timing.
Yeah, well, at least at this point, it certainly is. We did find that President Trump's approval rating hasn't changed all that much. We have him at 42%, but there was a lot going on underneath, not only underneath the numbers of his approval rating, but on a whole host of issues that we looked at in terms of the Mueller investigation. We also took a turn and a look at the new Congress and what Americans think they would like the focus to be in Washington, and also their impressions of how Democrats and Republicans are treating each other.
And do they want a government shutdown in exchange for building a wall, which I think has been something in the White House that's been talked about every now and then.
Mentioned every now and then.
There's been a little bit of news around that, so we were in the field at the right time with that. Yeah. So we thought, who better than Ron Brownstein from CNN? He's a senior political analyst there and Atlantic Media's senior editor. Also now a three-peat guest on Poll Hub.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
And we have to check the records. There may be Harry Enton. We're going to check.
No, he's twice.
Well, now
he'll be a three-peat.
now. Yeah,
he will
now
be a three-peat.
Anyway,
first
CNN
Ron.
colleagues.
Anyway, Ron, welcome.
Jay, thanks for having me. Is that Michael Jordan, three-peat? Wow.
Yeah, we just don't have a $100,000 ring to give you, but we'll work on that. We'll see what we can do.
We'll give him a sweatshirt, Marist, Red Fox.
Hey, one of the things that you've talked about a lot is you're great at looking at subgroups within polls, and for years you've identified subgroups that have driven the narrative and driven elections in this country. And one of the groups that we look at and we break out is suburban men and suburban women. And in our latest poll, when we were looking at approval ratings of the president, one of the things that leapt out at me, and part of this is by watching how you do this, is that there was no group that was more strongly disapproving of the president than suburban women. They were even African Americans, who are the people the group that least likes Trump. They weren't as strongly opposed when we broke it into strongly disapproved, as was suburban women. What do you think is going on there? But also in the context of that, our approval rating on the president really hasn't changed over the last 18 months. The top line essentially hasn't changed. What's going on?
Well, look, first of all, I mean, you think about it at the highest level. Trump won, 46% of the vote in 2016. In 2018, Republicans appear to have won about 45% just under 45% of the total vote in the House national popular vote. And his approval rating in the exit poll on Election Day was 45%. And in most polling, like yours, it's somewhere between 40 and 45. He has a base. He has governed with that base firmly in sight at all times. And again, as we talk about this possibility of a border shutdown, of a government shutdown for a wall that 60% of the country opposes, but he has done nothing to expand that base. And if anything, he seems to be hardening and intensifying the resistance to his direction among the voter groups beyond that core. And clearly among them, one of the most important are these suburban white women. Now, people have different definitions of that. I define that essentially interchangeably, at least in the way I've used it, with college-educated white women who have been a slightly Democratic-leaning constituency for the last 25 years, but who have been driven much further away from the Republican Party under Trump. I mean, it is worth noting that, yes, Hillary Clinton won most college-educated white women in 2016, but she won 51% of them. And I believe, as I recall, the highest number for Democrats among them in any House election going back to 1992 has been 52%. In this election, according to the exit poll, Democrats won 59% of these college white women. And that was obviously a big part of why Republicans were obliterated, really,
Ron,
in the white-collar suburbs of so many metro areas.
Yeah, Ron, is that about a political realignment that you're thinking about, or is this about Donald Trump and just what he's kind of brought to the political marketplace?
I think it is. I think it is a realignment. As long, how's this for a hedge answer? It is a realignment as long as the Republican Party is defined by Trump.
Okay.
You're kind of having it both ways there.
I am kind of having it both ways because there is no. The thing about realignments is they are subject to the parties responding to them. Right? Parties can always respond to what happens. Nothing is written, I think, in stone in that sense. But I think it is pretty clear that the price, I've said that what 2018 was, 2016 showed the benefits in many ways of the Trump trade that he is imposing on the GOP. Clearly, if you look at these last two elections, if you look at public opinion across a whole range of issues, what Trump is doing is he is trading white-collar votes for blue-collar votes. He's trading younger voters for older voters. He's trading suburban voters for rural voters. That is the trade the Republican Party is accepting by essentially lashing itself to the mast of the Trump presidency. And in 2016, you saw the potential benefits of that with his kind of maximum turnout and maximum margin among those groups, blue collar, older, evangelical, and non-urban whites, and they win the presidency. They win those key Rust Belt Senate seats as well that looked endangered, Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and you see the benefits. I think 2018 was a sustained lesson in the cost, which is that all of the groups that should have been antagonized and that your polling had told us for 18 months was being antagonized by Trump, in fact, turned out in big numbers and voted in big margins against the Republicans. And by that, I'm thinking not only of these college white women, but Democrats doing much better than usual among college white men. And then the millennial numbers getting up to extraordinary. 67% of voters under 30, 58% of voters 30 to 44, not to mention what happened with Hispanics, Asians, and African Americans. So I think the full ledger on Trumpism is in much clearer focus after 2018. And again, the House popular vote in 2018, the Democrats are now up by 9 points, almost 9 points in the popular vote, a bigger margin than Republicans managed in either 94 or 2010, and the largest margin in sheer votes ever in a midterm election. In fact, Democrats over 53% of the popular vote. Republicans haven't gotten that high in a House popular vote. Lee, here's the trivia question. Since when? When's the last time Republicans got as high in the popular vote in the House as Democrats did this year? The answer...
1948, 46, 48.
46.
Yeah.
46 is right. So 70 years.
That was Jay doing an imitation of my voice, correctly answering that.
That is that's why we're on a political podcast.
Well, we knew it wasn't recent memory, for sure.
It was not recent memory. And so I published some numbers this week from the exit poll in 2018 that had not previously been published, and which kind of put a further kind of dark line under all of this, because even with what we saw in 2018 among college whites and blue-collar whites, where the college whites, as you know, in the exit poll, moved further toward the Democrats than we have seen before, and where Republicans suffered some erosion, not huge erosion, but some erosion with the working-class whites, even that somewhat obscured what happened, because both of those numbers include evangelical Christians.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about how that factor is actually good news and bad news for both parties.
Right. Yes. So what we did was this week, working with the Edison Research, was we looked at the basic divide that that all of us have talked about for years, and I give you great credit for adding to your polls after many years of discussion. Is we think of whites, we think of two cuts among whites. We think of college or non-college men and women, and there are significant differences in those kind of four quadrants among white voters. But what we did in this exercise this week was add another cut, add a third cut. Are you an evangelical Christian or not? So in essence, you have 8 groups. You have, non-college evangelical Christians, men and women, college evangelical Christians, men and women, and then the non-evangelicals. And what that exercise shows, and I should add that this has been the subject of a considerable backstage debate among Democratic strategists for several years. What that exercise shows is that evangelical Christians have consolidated behind Republicans through every possible subgroup. I mean, there is almost no difference between college-educated and non-college evangelicals, between men and women. As the group has shrunk, as it has shrunk as a share of the overall population, it has become more homogenous and more uniformly Republican, voting 3/4 or more for Republican candidates. So that is a big, hill to climb for Democrats in southern states where they are a big share of the white vote. On the other hand, when you look at the non-evangelical whites, what it shows you is that the collapse under Trump among those white-collar whites is even bigger than it appears. I mean, if you're looking only at college-educated white women who are not evangelicals, and I think you guys would say that that's probably our definition in our head of these suburban white women outside of the South. 71% of them voted Democratic in the midterm election, and an even higher percentage, 74% of them, said
Sure,
they disapproved of Trump's job performance.
we saw that in a lot of our state polling for the contested Senate races, where we weren't necessarily polling in blue states or red states, and when we're looking at suburban women in the context of women who are living outside of the urban areas who are college educated, those numbers, they really go off the roof.
You're talking about, like, if you're at 71%, excuse me, you're approaching the level among African American. I mean, you're not quite there, but you're at least among Hispanics, right? I mean, that's comparable to what Democrats get among Hispanics. And then the equally interesting part is that if you look at white non-college voters, the white working class voters who we view as kind of the monolithic core of Trump's base, when you separate out the evangelicals, it's a much more contested story. In fact, if you separate out the evangelicals, the white non-college voters who aren't evangelicals, who are the dominant, kind of players in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Democrats actually won them in the national exit poll narrowly, 52-46, with a big gender gap. They won the women, they lost the men. I've seen private polling from organized labor and others that have had those non-college, non-evangelical whites narrowly voting Republican. But either way, it's roughly 50-50 as opposed to the 2-1, that we're kind of used to looking at overall for Republicans. And I think that is, again, you see under Trump a kind of strategy of deepening but narrowing. I mean, he's deepening the hold on the groups in society that are most uneasy about the way America is changing. But there is a price to it, and that price became much more apparent in 2018, not only in these white-collar suburbs, but even among these working-class white women who, at least according to the exit poll, voted almost 60% Democratic, and who disapprove of Trump at roughly the same level.
Way back in my graduate school days when I sort of was introduced to the concepts of political realignments, one of the things that we understood theoretically is they're very often accompanied with a surge in interest because you need those extra energy folks to kind of move the electorate. And clearly what you're talking about in the midterm elections was this, unprecedented. I mean, it went from 40-something, low 40s to 50% turnout, which is, literally off the charts. Going forward, are we seeing that kind of energy could become part of what Republicans should be worrying about if, in fact, the Trump support is deeper but narrower?
So the highest turnout in midterms since 1914, right? And the highest we've had since World War I at the presidential level is 1960, which was almost 64%. The last one was 60. Look, I mean, we're talking, it increased 14 points almost from 14 to 18. It would not be shocking to see it go up in 2020 beyond where it was in 2016. Now, who that benefits is a very interesting question. Certainly, there are lots of non-college and especially rural whites. I mean, there's some indication that the rural turnout slipped in 2018, who may come out with Trump on the ballot in a way they did not come out for Republicans, even with his imprimatur. But I think, and I've written, if you look at the history, I think there's no question that the biggest change in the electorate between 2018 and 2020 is that younger voters will be a bigger share of the vote next time than they were this time. I mean, that is just an unequivocal pattern that they will 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 percentage points more of the total vote than they were in 2018. And obviously, that's a real challenge for Republicans when Trump, is facing 67% of voters 18 to 29, essentially the millennial generation, and 58% of those 30 to 44, which is the older millennials and the younger part of Gen X, voted Democratic. Trump is, he reminds me a little bit of, as we're all baseball fans here, it was like a general manager who, trades away all the prospects to try to squeeze out one World Series win. And then his attitude is, well, look, when all of that bills come due, I won't be here anyway. And to some extent, that's what he is doing. I mean, I think it's very hard, in polling in 2016, ABC, Washington Post, private polling, 2/3 or more of Americans under 30 said they thought that he was a racist. And that he was sheltered from the full force of that gale because a lot of them didn't like Hillary Clinton, and they splintered off to the third-party candidates in pretty large numbers. I think what you saw in 2018, to go back to my earlier point, the full price of that became more apparent. And I think in 2020, it could be more apparent yet if we have a reversion to the normal patterns of younger voters constituting a larger share of the electorate.
Can we get back to immigration for a second, Ryan? Because I've got a question about that. You've been around long enough to know that immigration isn't the first time at the dance for immigration to be an issue in politics. And we looked back at the approval ratings of presidents on how they handled immigration. The different polls, slightly different questions. So these aren't exactly apples to apples comparisons. But at one point, George Bush had only 22% approval rating with regards to immigration. Barack Obama had a 47% approval rating at a period in his term, and Donald Trump's is currently at 44%. Immigration doesn't seem like a good issue for any president to try and ride, to an election win. But Trump seems to think it's different because of this base strategy you're talking about. Is he wrong?
Well, so I have been writing about polls about immigration since the early 1990s when I started at the LA Times. I think the first poll I wrote about immigration was in 1992. I covered Prop 187 in California from the DC Bureau in 1994. And I think public opinion about immigration has been unbelievably consistent over the 25 years I've been writing about it. In that, the public, on the one hand, does not believe it is either kind of moral or as importantly, pragmatic to massively deport people who are here illegally. And on the other hand, they do not believe, that we should just kind of throw up our hands and allow anybody in who wants to come in. They support the rule of law, but they want the rule of law applied in a pragmatic and compassionate way. I mean, it doesn't seem to be that complicated. The reason it's so hard for, any president to, I think, get a very high level of approval is because neither side is entirely comfortable accepting both ends of that public conclusion. Trump wants to run solely on enforcement. And Democrats, even though Obama was pretty tough on enforcement in his first 2 years, always seem to lean more toward the compassionate side. I actually do think it's one of many issues like the budget where there actually is a relative public consensus, but neither party can get there. And look, you're right. I mean, this is indicative of Trump's broader strategy, which is that in a world where I think pretty consistently, the evidence has been for 2 years that he tops out somewhere around 45% of the electorate. He has been focused on feeding, mobilizing, energizing that 45% rather than reaching out to voters beyond it. In fact, I think he uses voters beyond it as a foil more often than not to try to mobilize his own side. It is worth noting that while the public, I think, is very clearly, when you look at fights like the Arizona Show Me Your Papers law, they want the law enforced more than many on the left like to hear. Even within that, the wall has consistently been an extremely unpopular idea. I mean, in polling, Quinnipiac, for example, CBS, others, 60% almost every time say they oppose the wall, including preponderant majorities of all the groups that gave the Democrats their House majority. And so, I mean, the president is now in a situation of threatening to shut down the government, which is a tactic that the public doesn't like, in the service of a cause that is extremely unpopular, which is building the wall, with everyone else except base Republicans. So it is just further doubling down the strategy, or further narrowing the Republicans into the strategy of risking alienating a majority of the electorate in order to energize a minority of the electorate.
Right. And just this week, we found that 55% of Americans did not want to shut down the government over the issue of the wall, and are hoping that the president will compromise on the issue and we don't have to go down that road. But one other thing, I'm just looking forward to 2020. A lot of the things that you've been talking about suggests that perhaps, the Democrats are really in good shape. One of the things I think we find in our poll too, and you've looked at with the American Values Survey, is that it's not all about the issues, though.
No.
And so there are cultural divides that perhaps change these numbers a little bit and don't make the Trump strategy look quite as narrowing.
Right.
Could you tell us a little bit about what you wrote about?
I think that's a great point. So, first of all, I think that if you look at everything that we've seen over the last 2 years, I guess what I want to suggest is it is very hard to imagine Donald Trump winning 50% of the vote, or even winning the popular vote in 2020, certainly reaching 50%. It is less difficult to imagine him squeezing out another electoral college victory. So I just want to distinguish between those two things. I think all the trends in public opinion that we're looking at, I think make it very hard for him to win the popular vote. But if he can hold Wisconsin, Arizona, and North Carolina, which are kind of, maybe the last, one of those might be the last state Democrats need to get to 270, none of which seems out of reach for him, then he can be president again.
Well, but also because also, I mean, the issue here is it's not just about religion. I mean, you're talking about a state like Wisconsin, and we're not going to find, a large proportion of evangelical Christians in Wisconsin. But there are some similarities and commonalities in terms of their values on culture.
You are going to find a big rural population. Right. So, essentially, as I've said to you before, I think the fundamental fault line in American politics is between those who are comfortable, welcoming of the demographic, cultural, and economic changes we're living through, and those who find all of them ominous or threatening. And I've described this as a coalition of transformation and a coalition of restoration. I believe that is essentially where we are in our politics now. And, the coalition of restoration is what Trump has targeted just relentlessly. And I believe the coalition of transformation, what I would call the coalition of transformation, is bigger. It is a national majority. It is most people in the country, but that doesn't mean it's guaranteed to win the Electoral College, much less the Senate or even the House. And so if you kind of look at where I think 2018, we know that midterms don't predict the results of the presidential race 2 years earlier. There are lots of presidents who have had bad midterms and come back to win 2 years later. Clinton in 94,
some of you get
Eisenhower in
shellacked.
54, Reagan in 82, et cetera. But there are also indications in the other direction, like 66 or 78, where it went badly for the party of power. So there isn't a clear pattern. I think what there is, though, is a sense of the concrete hardening, to me at least, that if you look at the demographic and geographic patterns that we saw in 2018, I think there's a very high likelihood that the 2020 results are going to look an awful lot like this, and the difference will be maybe at the margin in exactly what you're suggesting, turnout at the margin among the different groups. But secondly, with Trump himself on the ballot and his ability to focus the debate on some of these cultural divides, can he pick up a few points among non-college, non-urban whites, culturally conservative whites in just a few states, particularly Wisconsin and Arizona, to get them over the top?
And that becomes his pathway to reelection. Of course, between now and then, there will be a couple hundred earth-shattering events that we have to deal with.
And Ron, a couple hundred Democratic potential candidates.
I thought you were going to talk about the Democratic candidates.
That's a future Ron Brownstein appearance when we talk about what kind of Democrat can do best to galvanize the Democrats and keep that coalition together. But I was just going to close by commenting, that we... every day we're caught with the news cycle, and obviously the whole Mueller thing is going to, break loose at some point, even more than it already has. And we can get all caught up in that. But one of the things that I always enjoy talking with you, Ron, is you identify these trends, things that are, more consistent, more patterned in our electorate, and things that we can look at that are insights into where our politics has been and where it's going, as opposed to the everyday back and forth smash mouth of our politics that we're getting. So I want to thank you again. I know you have some TV to do, and I know you love doing our podcast, but you got to make a living too.
Thank you, Lee, and I appreciate that. And I would just add that. Can I just underscore that point real quick as I go? Which is, I think you're right. I mean, obviously there are fluctuations slightly up and down, but there were long-term trends reshaping our politics before Trump. Trump has accelerated them, widened the separations that we were living through, both demographic and geographic, and not much that happens in office really affects that, except at the margin. I think we know that we have a pretty good idea what 2020 will look like. Kind of a Democratic coalition centered in the big metro areas, with big numbers among millennials, minorities, college-educated whites, especially women, facing off against a non-metro Republican coalition that relies heavily on evangelical Christians, older whites, cultural conservatives of all sorts. And the slight shifts in preference among those groups, and maybe more important, the slight shifts in turnout among those groups will decide things.
Yeah, and at first, to get to 2020, we have to get to 2019, and that's the time that we're going to enjoy talking to you again, I'm sure. So have a nice holiday, and we'll talk to you on the other side.
You too. All right.
Thank you, Ron.
Bye-bye.
That'll do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Mary Griffith is our executive producer, and Kenny Marples is our editor.
We'd also like to thank the Roper Center, archives at Cornell University, who provide us with the ability to look back in time at survey questions and results over the decades. And we're going to have a little surprise guest from the Roper Center coming up real soon.
We hope so. We've now put the pressure on to make sure that that person comes on. Anyway, questions, send them to pollhub@marist.edu.
Was that a threat? I mean, is that a threat?
I'm looking forward to it. I'm on the board. This will be fun. We cite them all the time. Let's find out if they're really there.
If you have questions about the family arguments that we have here, or if you have questions about the polls that we do, or anything about polling, send them to pollhub@marist.edu. You can reach out to us on social media as well. We answer real quick there, at Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook. Don't forget to subscribe. And wherever you're listening to this, there's also the opportunity to write a little review. And we're not going to try and influence that one way or another. We love positive reviews. Maybe that's a hint. But go ahead and review us and let us know what you think, because we're always looking to do a better job.
When I go to fast food restaurants, they say, would you like to do a positive review?
Do they do that?
Yes, they do.
I don't go to fast food restaurants.
You'll be healthier for it.